the advisory just coming in?
I think our computer should be reading it. Yep, it is in. And the maximum wind still at 120 miles per hour.
Okay.
Continues to slow, moving northwest at 6 miles per hour, minimum pressure 933. And we'll take you in. We can show you where the eye is right now. And then, of course, the all-important track to bring up for you.
This is kind of as we're doing it here.
Yeah,
so
you're seeing it with
we might have
us.
to make some changes to the graphic here, but it's a Category 3 hurricane, 120 mile per hour winds. The range of Category 3 is 111 to 129 miles per hour. That's Cat 3. So you can see it is weaker, and that's good. The forecast track appears to be, and I guess we'll have to zoom into it to see exactly how close it'll be compared to the last track.
It's a touch west.
It is a touch west.
It's a touch west. It looks like a potential landfall closer to maybe Sarasota County at this point.
Skirting the coast, pushing it offshore. And you can see essentially moving over Pinellas County up to Monday at 8 a.m., 90 mile per hour winds. So I guess we can conclude that this one is a little bit of a weaker forecast in terms of winds. Obviously very formidable as a Category 3 hurricane, but we're just glancing at it right now along with you folks as it comes in.
And this makes sense. You know, earlier we were showing some of the intensity, you know, the guidance we were looking at, and most of those models were keeping it at a Cat 3 or lower. So keeping this as a Category 3, which is still a major hurricane, definitely nothing to downgrade at that, but we'll take any sort of, you know, weaker forecast.
And let's zoom into that track again, Julie, and take that full screen, guys, if you would, just to kind of get the idea here for our viewers what this latest track is telling us.
You know, kind of, again, let's actually go into the graphics so we can actually show a more detailed and closer view. We can zoom in for you. Here we go. And we can zoom in. So you notice the latest track, the timestamp, Sunday, 8 p.m., the last track was probably a little more to the north and east, coming on shore, maybe closer to Fort Myers, to the Cat 4. This is a little bit weaker, but potentially closer to Sarasota County, but still within the cone. You know, it could go a little bit more inland or stay a little bit, you know, the eye could potentially stay a little bit closer off the coast.
Interesting, though. Look at Highlands County.
Well, yeah, and I want to point that out. I mean, it's outside the cone of air, but that doesn't mean that they won't have effects.
Right.
I don't want you to get that impression if you're in Avon Park or Sebring or down to the Archbold area or Lake Placid that you're out of the woods, so to speak. The cone is getting smaller because the time of arrival for the storm is getting closer, so the cone just shrinks and shrinks. The historical averages or mistakes that the forecast track has. So even though it's outside of the cone doesn't mean you won't have effects. So just want to make sure you're clear about that. But the cone is still there, meaning it can wobble, but clearly the trend has been a little bit to the west. So you know, in many ways that's better for us. What's more, I think better news here is the fact that it's a little bit weaker than it was. We were looking at Category 4, now this is Category 3. This can change, of course, both in intensity and track, but that's, yeah, I would say it's a little better news, but we're still talking about heavy rainfall amounts, possible tornadoes, local flooding, and of course very high tides on the backside of it.
And just as you were talking about impacts outside the cone, I just walked over to check if the wind field had changed. Hurricane force winds still extend out 70 miles from the center.
Right.
The tropical storm force wind field has actually gotten bigger, 205 miles from the center.
205 miles from the center. So that's what I was talking about with the track.
Yeah, 410 miles across.
That's a
unbelievable.
very big system. And normally, if it had been in the Gulf of Mexico, had a good time to build up a lot of storm surge. But that's not this is not that kind of storm surge hurricane. But it is a big wind field of strong wind gusts, especially. And we're talking winds up to 73 miles per hour, tropical storm strength, and then beyond that, 74 miles per hour greater. So this is a Category 3 hurricane. It's forecast to stay one, a major hurricane, and one to be greatly respected. But the good news is winds are down a little bit. I think that time over Cuba really helped, and certainly the westerly track. But we're still dealing with this, and we'll continue to deal with this throughout the day on Sunday and Monday, and the effects from this storm. So although there's some small better news there, we really still need to respect this hurricane.
And also important to point out that although the maximum winds forecast might be a little bit lower, that's even less favorable as far as storm surge goes. So we could be talking about more of a shifting threat as opposed to a diminishing threat.
Yeah, we were talking about that when looking at the wind graphic that Julie and I were showing you, that wind just right into the bay and right up along the coast. those high tides are going to be critical, and the previous high tide that maybe didn't get out all the way again, so just water kind of piles up. So that'll be a big story, I think, on Monday, but let's get through the issue with very heavy rainfall. We were just looking at an advisory from the National Weather Service in Ruskin, giving us a flash flood advisory saying, hey, we could get up to 20 inches of rain in some spots, but generally, what was the total? It was between...
More like 10 to 15.
Right, more like 10 to 15.
General.
But in spots, we could get up to 20, so 10 to 15. And you know what that does on a typical afternoon in Florida with summer thunderstorms. That's a lot of rain in a short amount of time. So that's a whole bunch of rain, so that's a concern, and especially wind gust as well. I'm really concerned with that because we're still talking about winds that could gust over 100 miles per hour and, until we get this thing out of here.
We saw that a couple weeks ago. Manatee and Sarasota counties, when we get stuck in that onshore flow and we saw that tropical heavy rainfall.
Right. Rain and flooding is a big concern here. A lot of areas, too. Rivers have been kind of high. Ground has been saturated in some spots, not so much in others, obviously. A lot of folks saying, I really need rain. It's so random how the rain falls here during the summer. But that's always a concern. How much water do you already have in the soil? And then you add another 15 inches of rain on top of that, and that can be problematic.